It was the kind of love story people dream of. I met Kelly at a friend's party, and in that single evening, I was captivated. She had this magnetic energy about her, something that pulled everyone in, and from the first moment, I was just like everyone else, enchanted. But with her, it felt different. When our eyes met across the crowded room, it was as if we had both been waiting for that very moment our entire lives. She was dressed in red, laughing in a way that was both carefree and inviting, a woman who effortlessly drew people in. I, on the other hand, was the quiet observer, always on the outskirts of the social whirlwind she seemed to thrive in. But somehow, that night, she found me. One conversation led to another, and before I knew it, we were spending every waking moment together. Kelly and I were an unlikely match. Me, introverted and cautious, and her, bold and outgoing. But somehow, it worked. Our wedding came soon after. It was a whirlwind, much like our relationship. Friends joked that we were rushing things, but when you know, you know. Or at least, that's what I thought. In the early days of our marriage, things were perfect. Kelly was the life of every room we entered, and I loved how she made even the most mundane moments seem like an adventure. Our love felt invincible, a fortress that no one could penetrate. I believed in us. I believed in her. But I didn't realize back then how easily cracks can form in a fortress, how quickly the walls can crumble when you're not paying attention. I didn't see it coming. I never thought that a single party, one she threw in my honor, would be the catalyst for everything to fall apart. Kelly had always been good at organizing events. She knew how to make an impression, how to throw a gathering that people would talk about for weeks. So, when she offered to throw a party for my birthday, I didn't think twice about it. I trusted her implicitly, never imagining that her charming demeanor would one day be my undoing. The house was filled with laughter, drinks were flowing, and the air buzzed with that familiar sense of excitement she always seemed to bring. People were congratulating me, toasting to my health and success, but for some reason, I felt off. It was as if something was lurking beneath the surface of all the smiles, the clinking glasses, and the bright lights. Maybe it was the way Kelly was behaving, slightly more animated than usual, her laughter a little too loud, her hand lingering just a bit too long on the arm of a guest, a man I didn't recognize. I told myself I was imagining things. She was just being her usual lively self, I reasoned. But as the evening wore on, that nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach grew. It was during a brief lull, while I stood alone by the kitchen counter, that I noticed it. The way she kept glancing down at her phone, a smirk on her lips every time she read a message. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that something about this party wasn't right. When I confronted her about it later that night, after the last of the guests had gone and the house had fallen silent, she brushed me off. "It was nothing," she said, smiling as if I were being ridiculous. "Just a friendly message, nothing more." But I wasn't convinced. I could feel the change in her, a subtle shift in our dynamic, and that's when I made the decision, the one that would change everything. I waited until she was asleep, her phone lying innocently on the bedside table. My hands trembled as I picked it up, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't want to be this person, the one who snoops, but I had to know. What I found in her phone confirmed every fear I had. My hands shook as I scrolled through the messages, my stomach twisted tighter with every swipe. The conversation was casual at first, light banter, jokes. But as I read on, the messages became darker, more deliberate. And there it was, staring back at me in black and white. Plans for a prank that had me as its unsuspecting target. Kelly and this man, this stranger I barely remembered from the party, had been planning for weeks. He was someone she worked with, someone I had never heard of until tonight. The messages dripped with arrogance, mocking my obliviousness. They called it the prank of the year, a joke so grand that I wouldn't see it coming. The final message was the worst. "Tonight's the night. Time to make him the punchline. He has no idea." Kelly had sent that right before the party, and my heart shattered. I couldn't believe it. This was the woman I loved, the woman I trusted with everything. The woman who had once been my partner in everything was now conspiring to humiliate me. And for what? A cheap laugh? A thrill? I sat there in the dark, staring at the glowing screen, feeling completely numb. My world was unraveling, and the one person I thought would always be by my side was the one pulling the strings. The conversation left little to the imagination. Kelly had planned the whole party as a cover. It was never about celebrating my birthday. It was about making me the fool. I was the main attraction in a cruel joke she had orchestrated with this man. I replayed every moment from that night, the secret glances, the flirtatious touches, her phone buzzing with messages. Everything fell into place. I felt sick. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing with betrayal. How could she? What had I done to deserve this? The urge to wake her up, to scream at her, was overwhelming. But I didn't. I sat in silence, frozen by a mixture of disbelief and rage. I didn't know what to do next. Confronting her wouldn't change anything. The damage was done. The woman lying next to me wasn't the same person I thought I married. I looked at her as she slept peacefully, unaware that her deception had been discovered. It made me sick how she could sleep so soundly while I felt like my entire life was falling apart. I put the phone down, careful not to wake her, and quietly left the room. I needed to think. The air outside was cool, a stark contrast to the boiling rage inside me. I stood on the balcony, staring at the city lights, trying to collect my thoughts. How could I face her in the morning? What would I even say? Every option seemed too small to match the enormity of her betrayal. Then, a thought crossed my mind. If she could humiliate me like this, what would happen if the tables were turned? If I exposed her? I had always been the quiet one in our relationship, the one who kept things steady while she soared through life. But not this time. This time, I wanted her to feel the weight of her actions. Morning came too quickly. I hadn't slept a wink, my mind racing with a plan I never thought I'd be capable of. Kelly woke up, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. She smiled, kissed me on the cheek like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I watched her go through the motions of our routine, humming softly as she made coffee. How could she be so normal? Didn't she feel any guilt? Didn't she care? After breakfast, I knew I couldn't hold back any longer. I had to confront her. I couldn't live another second in this lie. I waited until she was finishing up her emails, and then with my heart pounding, I asked the question that had been suffocating me since last night. Kelly, who is he? She froze for just a second, her fingers hovering over the keyboard before she quickly recovered. Who? She asked, her voice so steady, so practiced. She had rehearsed this, I realized. She was prepared to lie. The man from the party, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The one you've been texting. Her eyes flickered just for a moment, and then she laughed like I was being absurd. Are you serious? You're going through my phone now? Come on, don't be ridiculous. Don't lie to me, Kelly, I said, my voice rising. I saw everything, the messages, the plans. You think I didn't notice? You were planning to humiliate me. For the first time, her mask slipped. A flicker of panic crossed her face before she quickly composed herself. It was a joke, she said, her voice tight. It was nothing serious, just a stupid prank. You're blowing this way out of proportion. A prank? I echoed, disbelief coursing through me. You call plotting to make me the laughingstock of my own birthday party a joke? You were conspiring with another man behind my back. She sighed, exasperated. It wasn't like that, okay? You're being paranoid. It was just for fun. You're taking it way too personally. Personally? My voice cracked. You plotted to embarrass me in front of everyone we know. How am I supposed to take that? Silence stretched between us. She opened her mouth to speak, but then closed it again, unable to find the words to defend herself. That's when I knew there was no justification for what she had done. She had crossed a line, and there was no coming back from it. Without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there in the kitchen, stunned. I had decided what I was going to do next, and nothing she could say would change my mind. Shall I continue with Chapter 5? As I walked away from her, the weight of my decision settled over me like a dark cloud. My heart was pounding, but my mind was clear for the first time in hours. I had spent too much time being the quiet, forgiving husband, and now it was my turn to flip the script. Revenge wasn't something that came naturally to me. I had always prided myself on staying calm, on keeping my emotions in check. But Kelly's betrayal had pushed me past my limits. She had orchestrated this whole prank as if our marriage was just another game for her to win. Well, not anymore. This time, I would be the one pulling the strings. I went back to our bedroom and sat down at the desk, opening my laptop. I scrolled through the list of contacts from the party. Our friends, her coworkers, people we both knew. They had all been in on the joke, hadn't they? Laughing behind my back, waiting for me to take the bait. The thought of it made my blood boil. I crafted a message, simple, to the point. No drama, no emotion, just the truth. Last night, I discovered that Kelly and a man she's been seeing have been planning to humiliate me at my birthday party. This was the prank of the year they've been plotting together. I thought you all deserved to know the truth. I hesitated for just a second before hitting send, sending the message out to every person who had been at the party. Friends, colleagues, acquaintances, it didn't matter. They all received it. I wanted everyone to know who she really was, the mask she had been wearing. After the message went out, a strange calmness settled over me. I knew what I had done wasn't going to fix anything, but it felt like I had taken back a piece of my dignity, a part of myself that she had tried to strip away. The silence in the house felt different now, heavier, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the fallout began. Kelly came storming into the bedroom later that afternoon, her face flushed with anger. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she yelled, slamming the door behind her. "You sent messages to everyone? Do you have any idea what you've done?" I stayed seated, my fingers resting on the keyboard, refusing to meet her gaze. "I told them the truth, Kelly. Heck, that's all I did." "The truth?" She laughed, but it was a bitter, mocking sound. "You don't even know the full story. You're acting like a child, lashing out because you couldn't take a joke." "A joke?" I stood up, finally facing her. "You humiliated me in front of all our friends, Kelly. You made me the punchline of your sick game, and now you're upset because people know what you did?" She crossed her arms, her face hardening. "You've ruined everything. My reputation, my career, everything I've worked for. All because you couldn't handle a little prank." I shook my head, unable to comprehend her reasoning. "You don't even care, do you? You don't care that you've shattered everything we built together. This marriage, our trust, it's all just a game to you." For the first time, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Fear, maybe. But it was quickly masked by her anger. "You're overreacting. It wasn't supposed to be like this. You were never supposed to find out. It was just supposed to be fun." "Fun?" I repeated, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. "You think it's fun to destroy the person who loves you?" She opened her mouth to speak, but then stopped. We stood there in silence, the space between us filled with years of memories, laughter, and now, betrayal. I realized then that whatever we had was gone, buried beneath the wreckage of what she had done. "I'm done, Kelly," I said quietly, stepping past her. "You've taken everything from me, but you won't take my dignity." After I left the house, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew that whatever Kelly and I had shared was over, and no amount of apologies or explanations could change that. I found myself at the door of a small apartment I had been eyeing for months, something I had kept in the back of my mind as an escape route. I signed the lease that afternoon. The messages I had sent out spread like wildfire. My phone buzzed nonstop with replies, some supportive, others filled with disbelief. A few friends called to tell me they had no idea what was going on, that they thought the party was just a normal birthday celebration. Others offered to meet up, to talk things through, but I wasn't ready for that. I needed space. I needed to be alone with my thoughts. Kelly, on the other hand, wasn't handling the fallout as gracefully. Her social media was flooded with comments, people questioning her, some defending her, others condemning her actions. I stayed away from it all. I didn't care to see how she spun the story to make herself the victim. I had done what I needed to do, and now it was time to move on. But moving on wasn't as easy as I thought it would be. The apartment was small, nothing like the home Kelly and I had shared. It felt foreign, cold, like it belonged to someone else. There were no pictures on the walls, no familiar scents, just me, my boxes, and the silence. It wasn't the life I had envisioned, but it was the life I had now. The days passed in a blur, and I found myself drowning in a mixture of anger and sadness. I had lost more than just a wife. I had lost a part of myself, the part that believed in love, in trust. Kelly had taken that from me, and I wasn't sure if I'd ever get it back. But despite the pain, there was something liberating about it all. I was no longer tied to someone who had betrayed me. I was free to rebuild my life on my own terms, to start over without the weight of her lies dragging me down. And that's exactly what I intended to do. The first few weeks in the new apartment were a strange mix of relief and loneliness. Each morning, I'd wake up expecting to hear Kelly's voice, the familiar clatter of breakfast, the routines we had built over the years. But instead, there was only silence. The quiet should have been comforting, a break from the chaos, but it felt unnerving. I'd sit in the living room, staring at the boxes I hadn't yet unpacked. I didn't even know where to begin. What was I supposed to do with the remnants of a life I no longer recognized? The photos of us at our wedding, the framed pictures of vacations that now felt like distant memories. Each item was a reminder of what I had lost, what had been taken from me. It wasn't long before I realized that if I wanted to move on, I had to make some changes. I needed to start fresh, not just physically, but emotionally. That meant letting go of the past, piece by piece. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. One night, after staring at the boxes for what felt like hours, I made the decision. I started with the photos. I took each one out, examined it, and then placed it in a pile for donation or disposal. Some photos went into a shoebox to keep, memories of friends and family that weren't tainted by Kelly's betrayal. But the ones of us, the ones where we were laughing, smiling, holding hands, they went into the trash. With each item I let go, I felt a little lighter. The apartment slowly transformed into something that was mine. I hung new art on the walls, bought a few plants to breathe life into the space, and even took up cooking again. It was as if I was reclaiming the small, mundane things in life that had once brought me joy. But it wasn't just about the physical changes. I had to confront the emotional baggage I'd been carrying around. It was harder than throwing away photos or rearranging furniture. It meant facing the truth about my relationship with Kelly, not just her betrayal, but my own blindness. I had missed the signs, ignored the red flags because I had wanted to believe in her, in us. That realization hurt more than anything. I decided to get back into therapy. Talking to someone helped, even if it was just to vent. The therapist, a kind woman in her late 40s, helped me unpack the layers of anger and sadness that had built up over the years. She didn't give me easy answers, but she did offer something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time: hope. Rebuilding after betrayal is a process, she said one session. It's not just about moving on from the person who hurt you. It's about rediscovering yourself, figuring out who you are without them. That stuck with me. Who was I without Kelly? For so long, I had defined myself by our relationship, by the roles we played in each other's lives. Without her, I felt untethered, unsure of who I was supposed to be. But slowly, I started to find pieces of myself again, the parts that had been buried under years of compromise, of putting her needs first. One of the first things I did was reconnect with old friends. During my marriage, I had let a lot of friendships fade, mostly because Kelly was always the center of our social world. Now, without her, I realized how isolated I had become. I reached out to a few people I hadn't spoken to in years, people who had once been important to me. To my surprise, they were more than willing to welcome me back into their lives. We started meeting up for drinks, catching up on lost time. It was refreshing to be around people who knew me before Kelly, who didn't see me as part of a couple, but as an individual. Then, there was work. For years, I had thrown myself into my career, but it had always felt like something I did to support the life Kelly and I were building together. Now, it felt different. I started taking on new projects, pushing myself in ways I hadn't before. Work became a way for me to focus my energy, to prove to myself that I could still succeed, still thrive without her. But even as I rebuilt, there were moments when the pain resurfaced. Sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I'd still think about her. I'd wonder what she was doing, if she had moved on, if she regretted anything. Those thoughts were hard to shake, but I knew better than to dwell on them. Kelly was part of my past now, and that's where she had to stay. One night, as I was going through my emails, I noticed a message from her. It was short, just a few lines, but it stopped me in my tracks. "I'm sorry for everything. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I hope you're doing okay. Maybe we can talk sometime?" I stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity, my mind swirling with conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to respond, to hear her side of things, to get closure. but the stronger part of me knew better. Talking to her would only drag me back into the mess I had worked so hard to escape. I deleted the email without replying. That was the moment I knew I was really moving on. Kelly no longer had power over me, no longer occupied my thoughts the way she once had. I was finally free. The moment I deleted Kelly's email was pivotal. It felt like cutting the last thread that had bound me to the past. I had spent so much time dwelling on the pain, the betrayal, and the loss that I had forgotten there was a future waiting for me, a future that was mine to shape. The first real step towards that future was learning how to live for myself again. I didn't jump into anything dramatic. There were no grand gestures or life-altering decisions. I didn't quit my job or move across the country, but I did make small, deliberate changes. I started waking up earlier, going for runs in the crisp morning air. It helped to clear my head, to remind me that life kept moving, even if I had felt stuck for so long. I took time to rediscover the things I used to enjoy, things that had fallen by the wayside during my marriage. Books that had gathered dust on my shelves now became my companions in the quiet evenings. I joined a local gym, not just to stay in shape, but to meet new people, to expand my social circle beyond the friends I had shared with Kelly. I started cooking again, really cooking, recipes I had always wanted to try but never had the time or energy to tackle. I even began to think about dating again, but I wasn't in any rush. I wasn't looking to replace Kelly or fill the void she had left. I wanted to take my time, to focus on building something real with myself first. I didn't want to make the same mistakes or fall into the same patterns. Trust was fragile, and I needed to trust myself again before I could give that trust to someone else. Work, which had been my distraction in the early days after leaving Kelly, now became a source of fulfillment. I poured myself into my projects, but this time it wasn't to escape or bury my feelings. It was to create something meaningful. I realized that I had more to offer than I had ever given myself credit for. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. The recognition at work followed. I was promoted, entrusted with bigger responsibilities, and for the first time in years, I felt proud of my accomplishments. Not just as a means to an end, but as a reflection of who I was becoming. But rebuilding wasn't just about professional success or personal hobbies. It was also about healing the relationships that had been neglected during my marriage. My parents, who had always been supportive but distant while I was with Kelly, became a more regular presence in my life. I started visiting them on weekends, catching up over dinners, talking to them not as a married man, but as their son. There was something grounding about being with family again, and something that reminded me where I came from. Old friendships also began to mend. People I hadn't spoken to in years reached out once they heard I had left Kelly. At first, I was hesitant to reconnect. I felt embarrassed, like I had to explain why I had disappeared, why I had let those friendships slip away. But to my surprise, most of them didn't hold it against me. They understood. They had seen the cracks in my relationship long before I had. They welcomed me back into their lives without judgment, and for that, I was grateful. Then there was Marcus, my best friend from college. We hadn't spoken in years, not since Kelly and I had gotten married. He had always been the type to speak his mind, and back then, he hadn't been shy about his concerns over my relationship with Kelly. I hadn't listened. I had been too wrapped up in the whirlwind of our romance, too blinded by what I thought was love. When I reached out to him, I wasn't sure how he'd respond, but when we finally sat down over drinks, it was like no time had passed at all. He didn't say, "I told you so," or rub my face in my mistakes. He just listened. And in that moment, I realized how much I had missed him, missed having someone who knew me so well and didn't hold my past against me. "You look different," Marcus said, eyeing me over his beer. "Lighter, happier." I shrugged, a small smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "Yeah, I feel different, like I'm finally living my own life." "Good," he nodded, clinking his glass against mine. "You deserve it, man." It was the first time in a long time that I believed that. I deserved to be happy. I deserved to rebuild my life, to carve out a future that was mine, not one dictated by someone else's expectations or manipulations. The months passed, and slowly, the sharp edges of the past began to soften. I no longer thought about Kelly every day, no longer replayed the moments of betrayal in my head. It wasn't that I had forgotten. Some things you never forget, but they didn't hold the same power over me anymore. I had taken control of my life, and with each passing day, I was moving further away from the pain she had caused. I had begun to think of my life in two parts, before and after. Before, I was someone who gave too much, who sacrificed too often, and who trusted too easily. After, I was someone who had learned the hard way that not everyone deserves the love you give them, and that sometimes the hardest thing to do is to let go. But as I sat on the balcony of my new apartment, sipping my coffee and watching the city wake up below me, I realized that after wasn't about what I had lost. It was about what I had gained. I had gained clarity, strength, and most importantly, I had gained myself. The world was open to me again, and for the first time in a long time, I was excited about the possibilities. Life had started to fall into a rhythm, a peaceful cadence that was both comforting and unfamiliar. It had been months since I'd heard from Kelly, and the silence between us had finally begun to feel like closure. I had no desire to dig up old wounds or revisit the chaos she had left behind. I was content in my new world, focused on work, friends, and the quiet satisfaction of rebuilding my life. But the past has a way of resurfacing, even when you think it's been buried for good. It was a typical Friday evening when I received a message that shattered the fragile calm I had built. I was at my favorite coffee shop, catching up on some reading when my phone buzzed. At first, I thought it was just another work email or a friend checking in. But when I saw the sender's name, my heart stopped. It was Kelly. The message was short, just a few lines, but it hit me like a punch to the gut. "We need to talk. I have something important to tell you. Please, just give me a chance to explain." I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. I had deleted her last message without a second thought, convinced that I was done with her. But this felt different. There was a desperation in her words that unsettled me. What could she possibly have to say now? Part of me wanted to ignore it, to delete the message, and continue pretending that she didn't exist. But another part of me, maybe the part that still sought answers, hesitated. What could she possibly want after all this time? I mulled it over for hours, pacing my apartment, my mind swirling with possibilities. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever she had to say would change things, whether I wanted it to or not. Finally, I made up my mind. I wasn't doing this for her. I was doing it for myself. I needed to hear what she had to say, not because I wanted to let her back into my life, but because I needed to close this chapter for good. We met at a small cafe downtown, a place far enough from the life we once shared that it felt neutral. I arrived early, wanting to compose myself before she walked through the door. My heart was racing, a mixture of nerves and anticipation. I hadn't seen Kelly since the day I left, and I wasn't sure what to expect. Would she be the same person who had betrayed me, or had she changed? When she walked in, it was like a jolt to my system. She looked different, yet the same. Her hair was shorter, her clothes more subdued, but the confident air she had always carried was still there. She spotted me immediately and walked over, offering a small, tentative smile. "Hey," she said softly, sliding into the seat across from me. "Thanks for meeting me." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak just yet. I didn't know how this conversation was going to go, but I was ready for whatever she had to say. For a few moments, we sat in awkward silence, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between us. Kelly fidgeted with the napkin in front of her, her usual composed demeanor cracking slightly. "I know I don't deserve this," she began, her voice quieter than I remembered. "But I needed to see you. There's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you months ago." I raised an eyebrow, skeptical. What could you possibly have to say that would change anything? She looked down, her fingers twisting the napkin until it started to tear. "I know you don't owe me anything, but please, just hear me out." I crossed my arms, leaning back in my chair. "Fine, go ahead." She took a deep breath, and then the words came rushing out. "I wasn't honest with you," she said, her eyes meeting mine for the first time. "Not just about the party or the prank, there's more. I was pregnant." My world tilted. I blinked, unsure if I had heard her correctly. "Pregnant?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. Kelly nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I found out a few weeks after you left. I didn't know how to tell you. And by the time I worked up the courage to reach out, I was too far along. I didn't want to drag you back into my life, not after everything that happened. I thought it would be easier if I just disappeared. I sat there, stunned, unable to process what she was telling me. Pregnant? A child? My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. How had this happened? How had she kept this from me? Why didn't you tell me? I finally managed to ask, my voice tight. You think I wouldn't have wanted to know? That I wouldn't have wanted to be there? I was scared, she admitted, her voice breaking. I knew I'd messed everything up between us, and I didn't think you'd ever forgive me. I thought telling you would only make things worse. I stared at her, my emotions a whirlwind of confusion, anger, and something I hadn't felt in a long time. Sadness. A deep, aching sadness that I didn't know how to deal with. And now, I asked, my voice low. Why tell me now? She swallowed hard. Because I lost the baby a few weeks ago. I thought you deserved to know. I didn't want you to find out some other way. Her words hit me like a sledgehammer. The weight of everything she had just revealed crashed down on me all at once. I felt hollow, like the air had been sucked out of the room. I'm so sorry, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. For everything. For the party, for the lies, for not telling you about the baby. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to know. I couldn't find the words. There was too many emotions tangled up inside me to even begin to respond. My mind was still stuck on one thing. The child I never got the chance to know. The life that was lost before it even began. I don't know what to say, I finally whispered, my voice thick with emotion. Kelly reached across the table, her hand trembling. I know, and I understand if you never want to see me again. I needed you to know the truth. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I pulled my hand away, the emotions too raw, too overwhelming. I need time, I said quietly, Mike standing up from the table. I can't. I need time to process this. She nodded, tears still streaming down her face. I understand. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the cafe, my mind spinning with everything I had just learned. I had come here expecting to close a chapter, but instead, I had opened up an entirely new one that I wasn't sure I was ready to face. I walked out of that cafe feeling like I had just stepped into a fog, thick, suffocating, and impossible to navigate. My mind was numb, my emotions a chaotic storm. Kelly's revelation had knocked the wind out of me, and I couldn't find my footing. Pregnant. She had been pregnant with my child, and I hadn't known. And now that child, our child, was gone. A life that could have been, snuffed out before it had the chance to begin. The grief hit me in waves, rolling over me, pulling me under. It wasn't just the loss of the child that gutted me. It was the realization that I would never know what might have been. A future that had been stolen from me, hidden in the shadows of Kelly's lies. I wandered through the city for hours, the streets bustling with life while I felt completely disconnected from it. People passed me by, lost in their own lives, unaware of the storm brewing inside me. I felt hollow, like a piece of me had been ripped away, and I didn't know how to get it back. For the next few days, I barely left my apartment. I called in sick to work, avoiding texts and calls from friends who were starting to worry about me. I couldn't explain what I was feeling, so I didn't even try. I wasn't sure if I was angry, heartbroken, or just lost. I thought about Kelly. I thought about what she had said, about how she had been scared, how she hadn't known how to tell me. Part of me wanted to hate her for it, for robbing me of the chance to be a father, for keeping such an important secret from me. But another part of me, the part that had loved her, the part that still ached when I thought of the life we had shared, understood. Fear makes people do irrational things. She had made a terrible mistake, one that neither of us could take back. But even as I tried to make sense of her actions, I knew that forgiving her was a step I wasn't ready to take. Maybe I never would be. Kelly had been a ghost in my life for too long, haunting me with memories of betrayal, and now with the weight of a child I would never know. The grief was too fresh, too raw, and it would take time for me to heal. As the days passed, I knew I couldn't stay in that fog forever. I had been through too much already to let this break me. I had survived the destruction of my marriage, the betrayal of someone I loved, and now the loss of a future I hadn't even known was possible. I wasn't going to let Kelly, or the ghost of what might have been, define me anymore. One morning, I woke up with a clarity that had been missing for days. I knew what I had to do. I had to let go, not just of Kelly, but of the grief, the anger, the pain that had been consuming me for so long. I had to make peace with what had happened, even if that peace was hard-won. I started with small steps. I reached out to my therapist again, scheduling sessions to help me process the overwhelming emotions I had been burying. Talking through everything, the loss of the child, my complicated feelings about Kelly, the future I had to rebuild once again, helped. It didn't make the pain disappear, but it made it bearable, like a wound that was slowly beginning to heal. I also leaned on my friends, the ones who had stood by me through all of this. They didn't ask questions. They didn't need to. They just showed up, offering their presence, their support, without demanding explanations. It was exactly what I needed. One weekend, Marcus invited me to join him on a hiking trip, something we used to do back in college but had stopped doing over the years. At first, I hesitated, unsure if I was ready for something that required so much energy, both physically and emotionally. But I said yes. I knew that staying locked inside my apartment wasn't the answer. I needed to reconnect with the world, to remind myself that life was still out there, waiting for me to live it. The hike was grueling, the steep paths challenging my endurance, but in the best way possible. With each step, I felt the weight of the past slipping away, little by little. The fresh air, the beauty of nature, and the companionship of someone who had known me for years, it all felt like a balm to my soul. At the peak of the trail, we stood overlooking the valley below, the city a distant blur. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the crisp mountain air, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt alive. Marcus clapped me on the back, grinning. "Feels good, doesn't it?" I nodded, unable to stop the smile that tugged at my lips. "Yeah, it really does." Standing there, at the edge of that mountain, I realized something. I had spent so much time mourning what I had lost, my marriage, my trust, and now the child I would never know, that I had forgotten to celebrate what I still had. My life wasn't perfect, and it never would be, but it was mine, and I had the power to shape it into something new, something better. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself back into living, not just existing, but really living. I embraced my work, my friends, my newfound independence. I allowed myself to grieve when I needed to, but I didn't let it consume me. I started dating again, cautiously, not looking for anything serious, just enjoying the company of people who didn't carry the weight of my past. And as the seasons changed, so did I. Slowly but surely, I started to feel whole again. The scars were still there, reminders of everything I had been through, but they didn't hurt as much anymore. They were just part of my story, a story that was still being written. One evening, as I sat on the balcony of my apartment, watching the sun set over the city, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't known in years. I wasn't the same person I had been before all of this began, but I was okay with that. I had been broken, but I had rebuilt myself, stronger and wiser than before. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of it. I was ready to embrace whatever came next, knowing that I had the strength to face it. And with that thought, I stood up, stretched, and smiled at the horizon. The past was behind me, and the future was mine to create. The end.